Hi brothers and sisters. As you can see, I'm in my room, but it's a little messy, but that's alright. We're going to be reading in Genesis chapter 37 through 41. I was going to say, we're almost there. We're heading for Exodus. It's going to happen pretty soon. Just keep waiting and watching the videos. I know barely anyone watches them, but if you do watch it for its entirety, I thank you so much, because I think this is a very good translation, and I don't want everyone to pay the $60 for it, which is probably a little overpriced, so I'm going to be putting it on YouTube for free. So we're almost there to Exodus. We're going to do this. And we're going to be reading in chapter 37 through 41. Let me clear my throat real quick. Okay, let's go ahead and just get started. Chapter 37. And Jacob dwelled in the land of his father's sojourning, in the land of Canaan. This is the lineage of Jacob. Joseph, 17 years old, was tending the flock with his brothers, assisting the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, the wives of his father. And Joseph brought ill report of them to their father. And Israel, or Jacob, he's going to be called Israel and Jacob back and forth. But remember, in one of the early chapters, God said, no longer shall you be called Jacob, but you're called Israel. And Israel just means to wrestle with God, because he was wrestling with either God or an angel. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, let's go ahead and continue. Sorry for that. And Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, for he was a child of his old age, and he made him an ornamented tunic. And his brothers saw it was he their father. And his brothers saw it was he their father loved more than all his brother. Sorry about that. I might cut this out because I just figured out how to say the sentence. And his brothers saw it was he their father loved more than all his brothers, and they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. And Joseph dreamed a dream and told it to his brothers, and they hated him all the more. And he said to them, listen, pray, to this dream that I dreamed. And look, we were binding sheaves in the field, and look, my sheaf arose and actually stood up, and look, your sheaves drew round and bowed to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule us? And they hated him all the more, for his dream and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream and recounted it to his brothers. And he said, look, I dreamed a dream again. And look, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing to me. And he recounted it to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you have dreamed? Shall we really come, I and your mother and your brothers, bow down to keep you before you to the ground? And his brothers were jealous of him, while his father kept the thing in mind. And his brothers went to graze their father's flock at Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, you know, your brothers are pasturing at Shechem. Come, let me send you to them. And he said, here I am. And he said to him, go, pray, see how your brothers fare, and how the flocks fare, and bring me back word. And he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him, and look, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, what is it you seek? And he said, my brothers I seek. Tell me, pray, where are they pasturing? And the man said, they have journeyed on from here, for I have heard them said, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brothers, and they found him, and found him at Dothan. And they saw him from afar before he drew near them, and they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to each other, "Here comes that dream master. So now, let us kill him and fling him into one of the pits, and we can say, 'A vicious beast has devoured him,' and we shall see what will come of his dreams." And Reuben heard and came to his rescue and said, "We must not take his life." And Reuben said, "Shed no blood. Fling him into this pit in the wilderness, and do not raise a hand against him. Then he might rescue from their hands to bring him back to that he might rescue him from their hands to bring him back to his father." And it happened when Joseph came to his brother, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the ornamented tunic that he had on him. And they took him and flung him into the pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they raised their eyes and saw, and look, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, their camels bearing gum and balm and ladanum on their way to take down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "What gain is there if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and our hand will not be against him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed, and Midianite merchantmen passed by and pulled Joseph up out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. And Reuben came back to the pit, and look, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his garments, and he came back to his brothers, and he said, "The boy is gone, and where can I turn?" And they took Joseph's tunic and slaughtered a kid, and dipped his tunic in blood. And they sent the ornamented tunic and had brought it to their father. And they said, "This we found. Recognize, pray, is it your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it, and he said, "It is my son's tunic. A vicious beast has devoured him. Joseph is torn to shreds." And Jacob rent his garments and put sackcloth around his waist and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughter rose to console him, and he refused to be consoled. And he said, "Rather, I will go down to my son in Sheol mourning." And his father keened for him. But the Midianites had sold them into Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's courtier, and the high chamberlain. Chapter 38. And it happened at this time that Judah went down from his brothers and pitched his tent by an Adullamite named Hirah. And Judah saw there the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua, and he took her and came to bed with her. And she conceived and bore a son, and called his name And she conceived again and bore a son, and called his name Onan. And she bore still another son, and called his name Shelah. And he was at Chezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. And Judah's firstborn, was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. And Judah said to Onan, "Come to bed with your brother's wife, and do your duty as your brother-in-law for her to raise up seed for your brother." And Onan knew that the seed would not be his, so when he would come to bed with his brother's wife, he would waste his seed on the ground, so to give no seed to his brother. And he did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and he put him to death as well. And Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Stay a widow in your father's house until Shelah my son is grown up," for he thought, lest he too die like his brothers. And Tamar went up and stayed at her father's house. And a long time passed, and the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And after the mourning period, Judah went up to his sheep shearers, he with Hirah the Adullamite his friend, to Timnah. And Tamar was told, saying, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." And she took off her widow's garb, and covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat by the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as wife. And Judah saw her, and he took her for a whore, for she had covered her face. And he turned aside to her by the road, and said, Here, pray, let me come to bed with you. For he knew that she was not his daughter-in-law. And she said, What will you give me for coming to bed with me? And he said, I personally will send a kid from the flock. And she said, Only if you give a pledge till you send it. And he said, What pledge shall I give you? And she said, Your seal and cord, and the staff in your hand. And he gave them to her, and he came to bed with her, and she conceived by him. And she rose and went away, and took off the veil she was wearing, and put on her widow's garb. And Judah had sent the kid by hand of his friend Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand. And he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, saying, Where is the colt harlot, the one at Anaim by the road? And they said, There has been no colt harlot here. And he returned to Judah and said, I could not find her. And the men place said as well, There has been no colt harlot here. And Judah said, Let her take them, lest we be a laughing stock. Look, I sent this kid, and you could not find her. And it happened about 3 months later that Judah was told, saying, Tamar your daughter-in-law has played the whore, and what's more, she's conceived by her whoring. And Judah said, Take her out to be burned. Out she was taken, when she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man to whom these belong I have conceived. And she said, Recognize, pray, whose are the seal and cord and the staff? And Judah recognized them, and he said, She is more right than I, for I have not failed to give her to Shelah my son. And he knew her once again no more. And it happened at the time she gave birth that, look, there were twins in her womb. And it happened as she gave birth that one put out his hand, and the midwife took it and bound a scarlet thread on his hands, to say, This one came out first. As he was drawing back his hand, look, out came his brother. And she said, What a breach you have made for yourself. And she called his name Perez. And afterward came out his brother, whose hand was the scarlet thread. And she called his name Zerah. Chapter 39. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, courtier of Pharaoh, the high chamberlain, an Egyptian man, bought him from the hands of the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. And his master saw that the Lord found favor in his eyes, and he ministered to him, and he put him in charge of his house, and all that he had he placed in his hands. And it happened from the time he put him in charge of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the Lord's blessing was on all that he had in house and field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he gave no thought to anything with him there save the bread he ate. And Joseph was comely in features and comely to look at. And it happened after these things that his master's wife raised her eyes to Joseph and said, Lie with me. And he refused. And he said to his master's wife, Look, my master has given no thought with me here to what is in the house, and all that he has placed in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I, and he has held back nothing from me except you, as you are his wife. And how could I do this great evil and offense to God? So she spoke to Joseph day after day, and he would not listen to her, to lie by her, to be with her. And it happened on one such day that he came into the house to perform his task, and there was no man of the men of the house there in the house. And she seized him by his garment, saying, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand, and he fled and went out. So she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside. She called out to the people of the house and saying, See, he has brought us a Hebrew man to play with us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I called out in a loud voice. And so, when he heard me raise my voice and call out, he left his garment by me and fled and went out. And she laid out his garment by her until his master returned to the house. And she spoke to him things of this sort, saying, The Hebrew slave came in to me whom you brought us to play with me. And so, when I raised my voice and called out, he left his garment by me and fled outside. And it happened, when his master heard his wife's words which she had spoken to him, saying, This sort of thing your slave has done to me, he became angry, or incensed. And Joseph's master took him and placed him in the prison house, where the king's prisoners were held. And he was there in the prison house, and God was with Joseph, and he extended kindness to him, and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison house warden. And the prison house warden placed in Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison house, all that they were to do there, and it was he who did it. And the prison house warden had to see that nothing was in his hand, as the Lord was with them, and whatever he did, the Lord made succeed. Chapter 40. And it happened after these things, that the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was furious with his two courtiers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them under guard in the house of the high chamberlain, the prison house, the place where Joseph was held. And the high chamberlain assigned Joseph to them, and he ministered to them, and they stayed a good while under guard. And the two of them dreamed a dream, each his own dream. On a single night, each a dream with its own solution. The cupbearer and the baker to the king of Egypt, who were held in the prison house. And Joseph came to them in the morning and saw them, and look, they were frowning. And he asked the Pharaoh's courtiers who were with him under guard in his lord's house, saying, Why are your faces downcast today? And they said to him, We dreamed a dream, and there is no one to solve it. And Joseph said to them, Are not solutions from God? Pray, recount them to me. And the chief cupbearer recounted his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, and look, a vine was before me, and on the vine there were 3 tendrils, and it was budding, and its blossoms shot up, its clusters ripened to grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and crushed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I placed the cup in Pharaoh's palm. And Joseph said, This is its solution. The 3 tendrils are 3 days. 3 days hence Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your place, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But if you remember I was with you once it goes well for you, do me this kindness, pray. Mention me to Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For I indeed was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I have done nothing that I should have been put in the pit. And the chief baker saw that he had solved well, and he said to Joseph, I too, in my dream, and look, there were 3 open work baskets on my head, and in the topmost were all sorts of food for Pharaoh, baker's ware, and the birds were eating from the baskets over my head. And Joseph answered, This is its solution. The 3 baskets are 3 days. 3 days hence Pharaoh will lift up your head from upon you, and impale you on a pole, and the birds will eat your flesh from upon you. And it happened on the 3rd day, Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker in the midst of his servants, and he restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing, and he put the cup in Pharaoh's hand, and the chief baker he impaled, just as Joseph had solved it for them. But the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. No, he forgot him. Chapter 41. And it happened at the end of the 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and look, he was standing by the Nile, and look, out of the Nile came up 7 cows, fair to look at and fat in flesh, and they grazed in the rushes. And look, another seven cows came up after them out of the Nile, foul to look at and meager in flesh, and stood by the cows on the bank of the Nile. And the foul-looking, meager-fleshed cows ate up the 7 fair-looking fat cows, and Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed a second time, and look, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, fat and goodly. And look, 7 meager ears, blasted by the east wind, sprouted after them, and the meager ears swallowed the 7 fat and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and look, it was a dream. And it happened in the morning that his heart pounded, and he sent and called all the soothsayers of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh recounted to them his dream. But none could solve the dream for Pharaoh. And the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, My offenses I recall today. Pharaoh had been furious with his servants, and he placed me under guard in all the house of the high chamberlain, me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed a dream with its own solution. And there with us was a Hebrew lad, slave of the high chamberlain, and we recounted to him, and he solved our dreams, each of us according to his dream, and he solved it. And it happened just as he solved it for us. So it came about. He restored me to my post, and him he impaled. And Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurried him from the pit. And he shaved and changed his garments, and came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I dreamed a dream, and none can solve it. And I have heard about you that you can understand a dream to solve it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, Not I. God will answer for Pharaoh's well-being. And Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, In my dream, I was here standing on the bank of the Nile, and look, out of the Nile came up 7 cows, fat in flesh and fair in feature, and they grazed in the rushes. And look, another 7 cows came up after them, gaunt and very foul-featured, and meager in flesh. I had not seen their like in all the land of Egypt for foulness. And the meager, foul cows ate up the first 7 fat cows, and they were taken into their bellies, and you could not tell that they had come into their bellies, for their looks were as foul as before. And I woke, and I saw in my dream, and look, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, full and goodly. And look, 7 shriveled, meager ears, blasted by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the meager ears swallowed the 7 goodly ears, and I spoke to my soothsayers, and none could tell me the meaning. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream is one. What God is about to do, he has told Pharaoh. The 7 goodly cows are 7 years, and the 7 ears of grain are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 meager and the foul cows who came up after them are 7 years. The 7 meager ears of grain, blasted by the east wind, will be 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he has shown to Pharaoh. Look, 7 years are coming of great plenty through all the land of Egypt, and 7 years of famine will arise after them, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. And you will not be able to tell there was plenty in the land because of that famine afterward, for it will be very grave. And the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh 2 times. This means that this thing has been fixed by God, and God is hastening to do it. And so, let Pharaoh look out for a discerning, wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this. Appoint overseers for the land, and muster the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. And let them collect all the food of these good years that are coming, and let them pile up grain under Pharaoh's hand, food in the cities, to keep under guard. And the food will be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will be in the land, that the land may not perish in the famine. And the thing seemed good in Pharaoh's eyes and in the eyes of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, Could we find a man like him, in whom is the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, After God has made known to you all this, there is none as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house. By your lips all my folk shall be guided. By the throne alone shall I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he had clothed them in fine linen clothing, and placed the golden collar around his neck. And he had him ride in the chariot of his viceroy. And they called out before him, Abrech, setting him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh. Without you no man shall raise hand or foot in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath-paneah, and he gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as wife. And Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and passed through all the land of Egypt. And the land in the 7 years of plenty made gatherings. And he collected all the food of the 7 years that were in the land of Egypt. And he placed food in the cities. The food from the fields round each city he placed within. And Joseph piled grain like the sand of the sea, very much, until he ceased counting, for it was beyond count. In Joseph 2 sons were born before the coming of the year of famine, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On, bore him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, meaning, God has released me from all the debt of my hardship and all of my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, meaning, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of the plenty that had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph has said, and there was famine in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. And all the land of Egypt was hungry, and the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to Egypt, Go to Joseph, what he says to you, you must do. And the famine was all over the land. And Joseph laid open whatever grain within, and sold provisions to Egypt. And the famine grew harsh in the land of Egypt, and all the earth came to Egypt, to Joseph, to get provisions, for the famine had grown harsh in all the earth. So, that's the end of this video. Before I end completely, I just want to mention another resource for me on YouTube that has been very great. It's called, sorry, it's late at night, getting a little tired, but it's called GCBI Media, GCBI, and it's based, I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think it's like college or a Bible study, something like that, and it's this guy named Randall Smith, and he's pretty great. He's very knowledgeable, and he teaches the scriptures true, and he's been a great help to me, and I hope you will check him out. One of his main, what he's known for, he's not a very popular YouTuber. His videos don't get that many views compared to famous YouTubers, you know, all that bad stuff. But I like him. I don't know why people don't watch him as much. I think he's great. He makes series called 1 Hour, 1 Book, and it just goes over a bunch of books in an hour. I think it's pretty awesome. So please do go check it out, subscribe. I think it's great. And I also want to mention about Genesis. Tim Mackey does a good sermon on Genesis. It's not really a sermon. It's just called Q&A, Answers in Genesis, Creation Story, but it's pretty good. I'll just say some things. He says, when it talks about the creation story, he says, when God is making the earth, what comes in your head? Close your eyes and imagine it. Do you imagine a globe? But most of the ancient Jewish people, you know, all back then, they didn't have the knowledge. They thought it was flat. So he said, when you're going into a different culture, like say you go to France, do not just go ahead and speak English. That's very rude. Don't go say, where's the nearest McDonald's? That's very rude. I don't want to spoil it all for you, but it's pretty good. So he says, try to get in the perspective of an ancient Jewish person, what they would have been thinking. So, hope you have a good day, and God bless. See you later.